Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Historia Politica Pública. This will be the third episode of the series about human nature and Hannah Arendt. In the first episode, I analyzed the politics and the human nature with Anne Phillips and Hannah Arendt. Second one, I focused mainly on the human condition, the book of Hannah Arendt that she wrote about how the environment has conditioned the human beings, and henceforth it is difficult to try to understand what is our inherent human nature. And in this one, I will finish with the human condition, the historical development that Hannah Arendt traces from the feudal societies until our contemporary world. She finished the book in 1958, so obviously from then on, there has been many more advances. Technological advances, the population has increased by far. And I will finish with the 21st century and some of the conclusions that we can extrapolate from Hannah Arendt's work. So, for Hannah Arendt, in her book, she points how the main threat was the economic modernization of the societies, and in that way she criticized Marx's theory of historical materialism as a kind of inevitable process to different societies, such as the class struggle, in which inevitably the working class will take the means of productions, and at the end they will be able to reach a communistic society. But for Arendt, this kind of idea of economic determinism is far from true, because for her the most important, as I mentioned in the second episode, is the action of humans. Remember, action, labor and work. Labor as the process of living and dying, work as the process of producing artificial objects, and action as the kind of activity in which the humans are able to do unexpected deeds. In that sense, Hannah Arendt makes a trace across history, and she points how it is the contingent human actions that have developed the world. Obviously, this is influenced by the environment, by the material conditions, as she points out, but nevertheless, every human being which is being born has the power to create something new in the planet. And the example that she does is the expropriation of ecclesiastical and peasant property that happened under the kingdom of Henry VIII. In the 16th century, Henry VIII was the English monarch who was married to Catherine of Aragon, but because she wanted to divorce for her to marry Anne Boleyn, she needed the permission of the Catholic Church. Obviously, this was denied because at that time it was 1540 something, I think 1530s, I will say. That was not possible. So what he did was to split from the Catholic Church, and obviously that changed the whole paradigm of the society. In those years, obviously Henry VIII had the power to do that, and at the end the Anglican Church was created. He embraced Protestantism, and Anglicanism, it has some similar, has some ideas of Catholicism, but it's more aligned with the Protestantism idea. Obviously, Henry VIII was able to do so, apart from that, from being one of the most powerful men on the whole Europe, because at that time there was this movement of Protestantism that was epitomized by Martin Luther in 1520. He put the 43 Theses in Prussia, in central Germany. I don't remember exactly the city, but the thing is that this was seen as the spark of the Protestant movement. Henry VIII had some advisors like Cromwell, in which he provided him with the political theory to legitimize his own idea. In that sense, after that, he ordered to expropriate all the ecclesiastical property, the peasant, and therefore Hannah Arendt points how those actions changed the whole paradigm of the society. So it is a combination of the material conditions, the environment, the atmosphere that was going on in Europe with the criticism to the Catholic Church because it was seen as corrupt and so on, and at the same time with the aim carried on by one person, which at this case was Henry VIII. In that sense, we can trace process from the peasantry through the Reformation, Later on, we have the industrialization with the labor, stable property, dynamic economy, and so on. So we have a stable property was when the objects were lasting for a long time. There were objects in order to give people a sense of identity, a sense of comfortably, such as living in a place. You let's say you put your table, your chair, in order to create an atmosphere with your loved ones and so on. But then on, you have the dynamic economy in which there is production and consumption all the time. You are buying objects that are not going to last for so long, but this is the main idea behind capitalism, like keep producing as much as possible. And with the iPhones, it is a very good example of the computer, how you have the Windows, but 2 years later there is a new update, and if you keep with your same computer for 20 years, it won't be possible to, let's say, upload or download the different applications that are happening and so on. So you are forced to consume more, even though you wouldn't need to do it. So with this idea of modernization, it also came the modern in science. You have better medicines, different kind of methods to live longer and so on. This is the expansion of human race, as Hannah Arendt points, and she says that because there are more humans, there are more production and more consumption, you have also the possibility of mobility across the world, traveling in different parts, and so on. So now for her, there is a world that has been destroyed. Before, it was the difference between private sphere and the public sphere. This is an idea that Judith Sklar theorized in her thesis, Liberalism of Fear, which I will talk about it in other episode. But it is the idea that there is no line anymore. Everything that is private is public. Also, we can think even in 2021 how working from home, you are forced to stay longer, stay always updated about what is happening in your job. You can receive message until your working hours. Also, we have the scandal of the CIA spying the citizens of the US, that Edward Snowden was the person who leaked that in WikiLeaks, provided information, and he had to exile, and now is being searched by the USA. So this kind of ideas that are merging together the private and the public, and this is part of modernization. So with mobility, as Hannah Arendt points, there is also the problem of climate change. I mean, there are more people in the world, people are moving more, are using more polluting artifacts. We see how many more people have cars than 50 years ago. Also the constant traveling by plane, there is more food, the animals are being breeding in order to be killed and be consumed by humans, and this has a negative repercussion in the environment. So all this is being coalescing in one huge movement that is taking devastating consequences in the earth. At the same time, in the human individuality, there is the world alienation, and here she obviously has reminiscence of Marx's idea of the alienation of the means of production, that the working class is submitted when they are working under a capitalist system. They go to the industry, they are working many hours per day, and if we think about the peasant societies in which the people was working the fields and they were able to eat those aliments in the working class period after 18th century, 19th century, we see how the people who are producing the artificial objects, as Hannah Arendt will say, those people do not receive those rewards in form of, let's say, if a worker is just focusing 8 hours per day in creating a leg of a chair, the worker won't have the chair at the end, and perhaps even he or she won't see the result of the work, and this creates a process of alienation. In that sense, Hannah Arendt going forward to the industrial society, she mentioned how society is to absorbing consumption to take responsibilities for the human world or to understand their political capacities. She called this process thoughtlessness, so the incapacity to thought to think, not because the people are not educated, far from it. On the contrary, this is a time, 1950s, 60s, when people are going much more to universities, to different higher education than before, but because they are so enmeshed in the work, they do not have the energy, neither the time to think about the work. This is important. As a consequence of this alienation, we have a paradox that happened in the 1960s. On the one hand, we have the huge number of students in university than in the whole history, in countries like Italy, West Germany, France, and so on. On the other hand, these people feel that even though they have more freedom than their fathers, they have been neglected by society. They have been lied after 1945, after the supposedly defeat of fascism, which is something that Judith Sklar mentioned, how it's an illusion that fascism was defeated in 1945, and she puts the examples on the US, like that it was proclaimed that it was a liberal country and the black people were oppressed. Also, the French Republic, how has been always very unsustainable, always lasting for a few years, and always being crushed by reactionary movements and so on. And the Fourth Republic had to be left aside for the Algerian War of Independence. So even in that time, in which supposedly there was countries, liberal countries like England, France, or USA, they at the same time or either had colonies in Africa and Asia where they were exploiting, or either they have their own system of oppression within the country, like in the case of the United States. So with this paradigm of general discontent, of anger, and at the same time a higher educated community, there is the social movement of the 1960s, which the Human Condition, published in 1958, was popular as a book of participatory democracy. So Hannah Arendt was very clever to analyze what was happening in her surroundings, did a depth analytical work on the different parts of the globe, and how the different discontent was channeled depending on the country, right? But you have 1960s US, the civil rights movement, 1968, the students movement in Mexico, in France, in Egypt, United Kingdom, and so on. Each country with their own particularities. In the Eastern Bloc, the people in Hungary or Czechoslovakia, they demanded more freedom, they demanded democracy, whereas in the Western world, people demanded a real democracy. And this is interesting because in the 1960s, there were many travels, encounters between students from Western Germany and Hungary, from France to Czechoslovakia, from United Kingdom to Poland, and they had different demands because their difference were their countries were different. So, for instance, in Poland, in Hungary, they did not have freedom to press freedom to vote, and so on. So they at least wanted the same as their Western counterparts wanted, but the Western people say to them, okay, but we don't have real democracy. Yes, we can vote. Yes, we can, in theory, have freedom of express and obvious to express themselves. Obviously, that it was not totally true, but as we saw with the use of police brutality towards the demonstrators in the United Kingdom when they were demonstrating against Vietnam, also in the USA or in France, and so on. But still, they have different ideas, but all this coalesce in one movement. So, those kind of movements, and the case of the May French in 1968 is very paradigmatic, is the idea of Hannah Arendt of the human action, how the humans can start things and set of frames of events that obviously will have a significant impact in the society. In the modern age, the radical economic process set off by human action, and those humans are caught in the midst of this relentless flotsam on the current of socioeconomic forces. So at the same time, people are up to travel thanks to the modern conditions, but at the same time, the police can use force in a different ways than before. Also, they can communicate with different parts of the world. So all these can join in different things and are fundamental to the society. In that sense, Hannah Arendt points how the modern age in 1950s transitioned to the nuclear age of nuclear technology. Obviously, that is a start when US throw the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, and after the Soviet Union started to develop its own nuclear weapons. And at that time, Hannah Arendt pointed how this changed the whole paradigm again. So, if we think in our era in 21st century, there is genetic engineering, biotechnology, nanotechnology, and this is, as Hannah Arendt points, quote, a rebellion against human existence, end quote. Let's say, if we are able to implant in ourselves cells in order to have different capacities, to be faster, to be smarter, and so on, this obviously will change the human nature, not just condition. This is the difference that you all know Harry points, how for the first time in history the human nature can change in the way that if we can upgrade our own skills, this will be the most change in the whole evolution of the species. And this is very important because Hannah Arendt was also thinking about that, even though she published the book in 1958 and she died, I think, in 1980, so the technology was not that advanced as nowadays. But still, she had the kind of insight about what was happening towards the future. In that sense, she points how through the human action, it is interesting and it is important to be aware because we can, quote, expect the unexpected, end quote. This idea that things can shift dramatically from one time to another, and perhaps the collapse of communism, it was something that was not predicted at that time in 1989, 1991, when after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of Soviet Union, but also the war that were happening in the 21st century, the war in Libya, the war in Ukraine, the invasion of United States to Afghanistan and Iraq, and so on. So she points how the human actions cannot be controlled once there is a process that has been set up in motion. It does not mean that this process can be controlled anymore. So, just to finish about this human condition book, we need to think that it was written more than 60 years ago, and there have been a great number of technology development, unexpected events, and dismissal by political life, which makes Arendt's analysis, I think, very pertinent and necessary at that time. At least, as she says, to think what we are doing. I believe that her teachings, her political ideas are fundamental to help us to understand better the society. And the paradox here is that with the expansion of automation, the advance of medicine, the development of green technologies, and the discoveries in fields such as biogenetics, human beings are perhaps more able than ever before to spend more time in the public sphere, thus engaging in action than working. However, and this is one of the more remarkable visions of Arendt, in my opinion, the hegemonical view of work is hard to eliminate, even though the automation is highly developed and it won't be necessary that we should spend that many hours at a time. And precisely in the last year, it has been implemented in some companies the working week of just 4 days, and it has been investigated that those companies has been even more profitable. The workers have upgraded their kind of performance. I don't know how this was measured, but the thing is, like, I mean, totally makes sense how working less hours, it will make you happier and feel better with the job, and even develop a kind of loyalty towards it, and you will have more time for yourself to spend on your hobbies and so on. This year I've been working 3 days per week, and I have felt that having 4 days for myself, I have been time to kind of keep writing my book, engaging with different people, studying by myself, going to different demonstrations, also doing the podcast, different activities, and I I felt that my mental health has increased by far, that I have been more happy on the whole 2022, and I think this helps you to even enjoy more in your workplace. That happened to me, because it's not the same to work 21 hours per week than 40, obviously. But at the same time, as Hannah Arendt points, and open quote, we live in a society of job holders, end quote. So in Gramscian terms, it's a problem not just of possibility, but also of hegemony. Hegemony in the Gramscian sense means that because he was perhaps the first Marxist to defy the original idea of Karl Marx of economic determinism to change society and how the working class had to acquire the means of production. On the other hand, for Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist thinker who was imprisoned by Mussolini and died in jail and wrote the prison letter and the modern prison, among other things, he pointed how it was necessary to change the cultural hegemony among society. So even though, according to him, the conditions could change, we need to help people to understand how to progress in society. And in that sense, he points how we need to change the hegemonical idea that the work is one of the most important things. But to do that, it is a process of the whole population. For that reason, he also developed the theory of the organic intellectual, in which every person in society is an intellectual in its own way. Not just the people who are in the ivory tower reading books and so on, but also the working class people. They are intellectuals in the way that they can develop tools, that they know things about the world, even though sometimes they are not academic in the sense, but rather have some ideas about what is happening around them. So that idea of the intellectuals, organic intellectual, is fundamental to change the cultural hegemony. So, going back to Arendt, the means are there, and yet the idea of a return to the vita activa, as was taught in the ancient Greece, in which politics gains again its relevance, it seems far from clear. If we establish an analogy with the ancient Greece, it will be like to, because in the ancient Greece there were people who had freedom to speak in the public sphere and analyze the political society. This was done upon the slavery of the captives of the world, but also those people who were considered inferior and the women. Nowadays we could do that if we assume that the robots and the different technologies do the work for us, leaving us more time to spend in the public sphere, which, by the way, is something that even Adam Smith, the considered father of capitalism, believed that because after the division of labor, people will be more alienated from their original job. They will be more productive, but still they wouldn't feel so comfortable doing kind of activities which will not see reward for them. And Adam Smith uses the example of the stapling, like the small instruments. You spend 8 hours per day doing the same repetitive kind of activity. Obviously, this will have a stultifying effect in your mind. So in order to have a kind of develop thinking, a kind of sharp insight of reality, you need to engage in public sphere with other people, to talk with each other, read books, and so on. Always important, this idea that is also developed in anarchism, to leave the person the freedom to develop its own skills and also to engage in community. But to sum up and finish the episode, Hannah Arendt's distinction between the aspects of human condition are essential to comprehend the transition of human beings from the ancient times. She defines perfectly the aspects of the human condition, and considering that human nature it is ambiguous to say the least, she does not even try to define what is human nature. Because, as I mentioned before, this is something that we don't know if we are like that, because we have been conditioned by our environment, if humans are in a different way or so, because obviously we have been adapting to the societies, and even in just a few centuries the world is changing so fast that it is impossible that our evolution has been that quick to get at the same level. So in that sense, living in 2023 and with the development of biotechnology which could enhance human qualities and create inorganic beings, perhaps it will be useful to engage in political action to analyze if now, I told this earlier, we may speak to a change not just of human condition but also on human nature. Yuval Noah Harari have written a lot about that, especially in his book Homo Deus, but also in many conferences and so on. And there are books about post-humanity, about biotechnology and so on, which are fundamental to understand this new paradigm that is going on the science sphere. And just to finish, I will say that if the capacity to think might be modified through technology, like enhancing our capacity to think, just to be redundant, think about it, surely the human nature will change. Or maybe, and this is one of the main ideas that many post-human political theories have developed, we will not be considered humans anymore. Thanks so much for listening to the episodes of Hannah Arendt and the first one with Anne Phillips. Please leave your comments. Recommend me some books. Obviously, Hannah Arendt has extensive bibliography. Also, she wrote H-Man in Jerusalem and many more political theory. She was a philosopher, which I really like her because she was very aware about what was happening. Obviously, she had to flee Nazi Germany for being a Jew, went to France and after to US, where she developed the whole of her career, but was adapting about the circumstances that were happening in the 50s, 60s and so on. Thanks so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episodes.